Every expectant mother knows that what she eats impacts her baby. And now research shows that is also true for our cows. Maternal consumption of ReaShure during late gestation had a positive effect on the in utero calf, setting her up for better health and potentially even higher milk production once she joins the milking string. Learn more at balchemanh.com/launch and launch your herd for life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Lecture Series. My name is Kim Jones, and in early 2022, we brought to you the first webinar discussing animal handling and consumer perceptions. And for today, we're thrilled to welcome back one of the most well-known and respected names in animal welfare and animal handling, Dr. Temple Grandin. Not only is Dr. Grandin an accomplished animal scientist, but also a world-renowned speaker. Dr. Grandin did not talk until she was 3.5 years old, but she was fortunate to get early speech therapy. Her teachers also taught her how to wait and take turns when playing board games. She was mainstreamed into a normal kindergarten at age 5. Oliver Sacks wrote in the foreword of Thinking in Pictures that her first book, Emergence, labeled autistic, was unprecedented because there had never before been an inside narrative of autism. Dr. Sacks profiled Dr. Grandin in his best-selling book, Anthropologist on Mars. Dr. Grandin became a prominent author and speaker on both autism and animal behavior. Today, she's a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. She also has a successful career consulting on both livestock handling, design, and animal welfare. When she was young, she was considered weird and teased and bullied in high school. The only place she had friends was activities where there was a shared interest such as horses, electronics, or model rockets. Dr. Carlock, her science teacher, was an important mentor who encouraged her interest in science. When she had a new goal of becoming a scientist, she had a reason for studying. Today, half the cattle in the United States are handled in facilities she designed. Dr. Grandin has appeared in Time Magazine, the New York Times, Discover Magazine, Forbes, and USA Today. Dr. Grandin, the floor is now yours.
It's great to be here, and I'm going to talk about animal behavior. And this is something I've been working on for a long time. I think we can go on to my next slide. And the thing I want to emphasize, if you want to understand how an animal perceives the world, it is sensory-based, not word-based. Get away from verbal language. Now, when I first started out my work with animal behavior back in the 70s, I got down into chutes to see what cattle were seeing, and people thought that was weird. Well, I didn't know that other people thought more verbally. No, get away from verbal language. Oh, yes, and I am a shameless book promoter. I've got a new book that just came out. It's called Visual Thinking. Yes, and it made the New York Times bestseller list. And in visual thinking, I discuss how there's different kinds of thinkers. And some of your best people, maybe for solving a problem out in the chicken house or out on a farm somewhere or with pets, often is a person who can kind of like see a solution to a problem, not just calculate a solution to the problem. But today, I want to talk about how animals perceive the world. Now, the next slide shows a fascinating brand new research result from Cornell University. This is high definition brain scanning. And those are circuits in the brain that connect up sensory circuits. And that red thing there, that is sort of like an internet trunk line, would you believe this, that goes from a dog's nose to its visual cortex. Now, think how trippy. 3-dimensional smell pictures. This is what this shows. Brand new research, hot off the press. Smell pictures. It's how dogs can think. And of course, they got conventional hearing and sight. And cattle are very tuned into things that they see. I found that if the cattle don't want to walk up the chute, it's because maybe there's a chain hanging down, or there's a reflection on water, or they see some little thing that moves that can stop them from walking through a chute. Let's go on to the next slide. And this is an interesting book about the immense world. It's about animal sensory systems. And it affects how different kinds of animals perceive the world. It's a really fascinating book. My co-author of Visual Thinking gave it to me for a birthday present. And it's kind of a real eye-opener. And I see these people out there yanking dogs away from the tree they want to smell. Well, we're depriving a dog of like its whole smell universe because they can smell 100 times better than we can. And you're yanking them away from their pee smell. A lot of dogs have a lot of behavior problems because they lead too sheltered a life and they don't get a chance to interact with other dogs. Now, the next slide shows a picture a young autistic man drew to show how he has pictures in his head. That's exactly how I think. It's movies in my head. And the next slide just says that when I was young, I didn't realize that other people didn't think in pictures. I didn't learn that until I was in my early 30s. And I do a lot of talks on visual thinking to many large corporations. And I tell them that the first thing you've got to understand is that people think differently. And let's just take something like internet things like today. An easy-to-use interface that's made by our non-mathematicians, but then the programmers have to program it. You see, you need different kinds of minds to get things done. So let's just go on to the next slide. And the reason why I've got the slides on your server is so that when the internet goes down, I have a backup. I was just on yesterday with a major tech company. They managed to trash StreamYard completely, absolutely completely. And StreamYard tattled and said on my phone, it's not your fault. Now, the thing about something new, this is what I call the paradox of novelty. This is true for any animal. New things are both scary and attractive. Now, you see how those two red steers came right up to that box, and it wasn't moving. So they came right up to it. So those steers were more attracted to the novelty than those steers that are standing there in the background. So both genetics and previous experience affects behavior. This is the thing. Attractive when they voluntarily approach, scary if you shove it in their face. And the genetically flighty animal is going to have a bigger reaction if you shove it in their face. And a lot of problems we have with dogs in new places like veterinary clinics is fear of novelty. And the next slide just simply says that something that's new is scary for both people with autism and for animals, because my fear system is ramped up. I'll startle really, really easily. Now, the next slide I just mentioned that a lot of dogs just lead too sheltered a life. We've got more behavior problems than we've ever had with dogs. When I was a child, all the dogs ran loose. The only chewing up of stuff we had was puppies chewing things up. Now we've got worse dog fights. You've got more behavior issues. Dogs are not learning social interaction if they're just kept in the house all the time. They're getting stir crazy. They are afraid of too many things. And there's been increasing problems with dogs being afraid of the veterinarian. And part of the problem is they haven't been exposed to enough strange people touching them, the new places. Now, the next slide is a study that my student did that I really like. Her name was Megan Corrigan. And it's illustrated something that I have talked to people for a long time, that since an animal is a sensory-based thinker, and horses and cattle, they're animals where when stuff they're afraid of, it's visual. Now, you'll notice that this children's play set looks totally different when it's rotated. So horses will walk by this 15 times until they no longer stopped and reacted. And when it was rotated, it became a new object. You see, us people that think in words would look at that and go, it's a kid's toy. But to the animal, it was totally different. So you want to habituate an animal to something new, they need to see all sides of it, because the memory is stored as a picture, a sight, or a smell. The next slide just illustrates that an umbrella and an orange tarp look totally different. So if I train a horse to tolerate an orange tarp, that's not going to transfer to an umbrella. You see how they look different. It's specific because it is it's sensory-based, not word-based. Now, the next slide, there's another study done by my student Dennis Wilson, and this was at a small meat plant. And throughout the day, look at how the shadows changed on this lead-up shoot. Now, this can happen out on a ranch, too. This can happen out in a feed yard, where maybe in the morning, everything works just fine, and then in the afternoon, you've got a shadow. Or maybe it's cloudy and you have no shadows. But these changes in the lighting, they can change throughout the day, can affect cattle handling at a meatpacking plant, at a ranch, at a feed yard. and then people get out there and get more electric prods after them. Now, I can't do anything about these shadows, but let the animal take a look at the shadow. Let your leader take a look. And then when the leader moves, then you can push the other cattle. The next slide shows blinded by the sun. You've all been on the highway where you just get completely blinded. Well, maybe change the time of day you work them by like an hour, and you'll get rid of this problem. The next slide shows a shadow I call the spider monster. I was once an equipment startup at a brand new, very large plant, and this is in the crowd pen that leads to the single file chute. Everything was working great in the morning. And then at 10 o'clock in the afternoon, the spider monster appeared. And Angus cattle decided they weren't going to walk over this. So what you're going to have to do here is build a roof over it, which they went and promptly did. The next slide shows things that might make cattle stop, a little jug, seeing a car through the fence. Little things that we tend to not see, they notice. Now, if you're out in the field working with a ranch or with a feed yard, and they're using a lot of electric prods, you want to make sure you take the distractions out, like that white jug right there or that red string. When the cattle are calm, they'll come right up and look right at that string. They'll show it to you. Get rid of the distractions. They can make a big difference. Getting a coat off the fence, getting the vehicles moved away so they don't see the vehicles. The next slide shows a chain hanging down. And why do I have to keep talking about chains hanging down? Because people still don't take them out. I still have to talk about a lot of the same stuff. Now, the next slide shows a handling facility where the cattle refused to go through the chute. This particular place had two identical handling facilities, both the same design. But this facility gave the cattle a view of loading a truck. And it's a weird looking truck because it's an Australian truck. And when I pointed out the truck there, they're going, we didn't see that. The facility without the truck worked really well, and the facility with the view of the truck worked really poorly. So I'm a person that's called an object visualizer. Everything that I think about is a picture. And then a lot of your scientists, they're going to be super good at mathematics. But one of the problems I'm seeing now, and I review a lot of journal articles, that I can't believe the nutrition experiments I've seen, where they explain every single lab procedure, but they don't tell me what was in the concentrate feed, or how it was prepared, or how the animals were housed. Things in the method that are very, very important. Yep, I can't do the fancier, higher math, but let me tell you, I tear the method sections apart on papers. Because things like the type of apparatus you used to mix cancer samples, yes, it changed the results, whether it's a magnetic stirrer or a Ferris wheel contraption. It changed the results. Methods matter. But you see, I see it. I see the magnetic stirrer. I see the little blue and white Ferris wheel thing. It's kind of cute, actually. But it's not cute. When using different mixing devices, trashed millions of dollars worth of research. Yep, and that's in my visual thinking book. You need the people like me that suck at math. You need us. Next slide shows that I got a huge visual thinking circuit in my brain. And we can quickly go on to the next slide. It just shows another view of a huge visual thinking circuit. But abstract math, I have difficulty with that. Yeah, but you're going to need people like me to go out in the field. I saw your ad there. You're going to go out there and help producers solve problems with chickens and pigs and everything else. Well, that field person, that's the visual thinker. You say, well, I went to this farm over here and we did this and that worked. And then your feed additive may get blamed for something that it did not do. Yep, I've seen that with vaccines. Blamed vaccines for killing cattle when they're actually being squashed to death by a hydraulic squeeze chute that was set too tight. Yeah, that was an actual case I worked on. Next slide just shows another picture of my brain. Math department trashed out. Now, we can skip on to a slide that's really, really important about the different kinds of minds. And there's research that shows these different kinds of minds exist. I'm an object visualizer. Another kind of thinker, and a lot of your scientists, will be the pattern thinker, the visual spatial mathematics person. And what I'm seeing now in science is we're going math crazy. And the method sections, I cannot believe 2 papers where they didn't just say what exactly the concentrate feed was that they fed some animals. And this is stuff right now, just in the last couple of months. And I wrote in there, it's really important as a reviewer, really important to say exactly how you did an experiment, because it matters. And the verbal thinkers think in words, and they tend to overgeneralize. Us visual thinkers maybe too much detail. And during the COVID lockdown, Betsy Lerner and I did this book on visual thinking, and you need the skills, people like me that may have a very difficult time with algebra. Let's go to the next slide. I want to get back to animals and visual thinking. This horse was terrified of black cowboy hats because during a veterinary procedure, somebody chucked alcohol in his face and he was wearing a black hat. White hats were fine. Black hats were scary. I put the hat on the ground, less scary. But as I brought that hat closer and closer and closer up to my head, then the horse got ready to rear. You see, you're getting a match. Fear memories can be very specific. Something they were seeing or hearing when a bad thing happened. The next slide just shows a funny slide of a tame steer. But the point I want to get across is calm animals are much easier to handle than frightened, excited animals. It takes 20 minutes to calm down. Now, in veterinary clinics, they're recognizing now the importance of fear-free. I got a slide on that. They're recognizing that. Fear-free slide, you can put that up. And reducing fear. Fear is a very strong stressor. Let's say you're doing research, for example, with one of your feed additives, and somebody went out there with electric prod and got the pigs all crazy with it. That could affect the results of your experiment, and your stress hormones are going to be up. Well, in the dog realm, there's been situations where you got 3 technicians holding a dog down for nail trim. So I like to show them this next slide of a lion cooperating with a nail trim. A lion. Feed it meatballs. You're welcome to clip his nails. Yes, and we got to teach dog owners to work with puppies, to get them used to strange people, used to having the paws manipulated, so nail trims don't have to be a gigantic fight. And I like to show this off at dog and cat conferences. And the next slide shows a problem with animals turning gray. My good friend Camille King, she's a great animal behavior person, and in her behavior practice, a lot of dogs were turning gray prematurely. And they tend to be the ones that are impulsive, chew up the house when they're left home alone. Now, that's a big problem. A lot of dogs don't want to be left home alone. And it's been a big problem post-COVID. And some of these real hyper dogs that have trouble with being home alone, turning gray prematurely. Now, fear. Fear is a really big stressor. Just say that on the next slide. Fear is a huge stressor. I can relate to that. My fear center was 3 times larger than normal. It's now been under control with low dose of antidepressant drugs for the last 40 years. But any little thing gets scared more easily. There's genetic differences in fearfulness. And a high fear animal gets scared more easily than a low fear animal. And the next slide, just interesting study on dogs. And a bold personality simply means it's low fear. We're now allowed to use the word personality in the scientific literature. 30 years ago, when I first came to CSU, the reviewers did not allow the word fear in one of my cattle papers, and they made me change it to agitated. Okay, now we're allowed to use the word fear. It's a proper scientific word. So a bold dog is low fear. And when it was put in the shoulder, it was less likely to get sick compared to the shy, higher fear dog. The next slide asks the question, do animals have emotions? Yes, they do. Prozac works on dogs. It's real popular right now. Neurotransmitters are the same. Yes, they have emotions. The main difference between people and animals is the size of the computer sitting up here on top. We've just got a supercomputer sitting up there they don't have. A lot of the other stuff in the brain is similar. And the next slide shows a very, very interesting study on the horse. And the horse got domesticated after 2 small genetic changes happened. And one of those genetic changes was an increase in serotonin neurons. I call it the Prozac gene. Probably not very scientific, but I like that. That's easy to understand. Also, another gene got changed that reduced back pain. That might help with riding. And then, of course, people like sports cars. So very shortly after that, the chariot got invented. 2021 cover story in Nature. Now, what are the main emotions in animals? And that's shown on the next slide. This is the Jack Panksepp emotions. All animals and people have these. This is very well documented in the neuroscience literature. You have fear. Now you're going to be shy or bold. It can also be called shy or bold. You can have anger. You can have separation distress, panic. That's different. When the dog is chewing up the house because it's alone, that's not fear, separation distress. Then you have seek, the urge to explore. Or let's take in dogs. One lab is frisky and wants to chase the ball all day. This other lab could care less about the ball, even though they were raised in the same environment. We had 2 dogs like that. When I was a child, they were called Hunter and Tucky. Tucky was ball crazy. Hunter would just watch Tucky chase the ball. He could care less. And then you have the sex drive. You've got the mother-young nurturing. Maybe you have the cow that protects the calf, but doesn't bother to lick it. See, they're separate emotional systems. And then you've got play. Now, I think a good way to look at it, the next slide just shows, you need to kind of look at this like a music mixing board. You can adjust the volume. And then there's a slot for fear. Both genetics and previous experience has an effect on this. When you get into the arguments about nature versus nurture on behavior, it's probably 50-50. Let's take cattle, for example. Really interesting study done at New Mexico State University with GPS collars. Some cows are a go-getter. Oh, we graze a lot of pasture. Other cows lay around the water hole. And you can look up that paper, keywords go-getter and laid back. Super scientific words, go-getter and laid back. Now, the next slide just brings up the point that animals need a non-slip flooring. Okay, what's the simplest thing we could do in the veterinary clinic to make it easier for the dog? Let's put a non-slip mat on there. And then the vet goes, I don't want to bother cleaning that mat. Well, then tell the owner to go buy a bath mat at Walmart, the rubber backing. Get your dog used to that. You bring it in, the owner puts it on the table and takes it away. You don't have to clean it. Now, I like to ask vet students, how many of you noticed that puppy's in a brace position? That's stress right there. Let's give it a non-slip floor. Same thing for cattle. Non-slip floor in squeeze chutes. Non-slip floor in single animal scales. Really important. Now, here's another interesting experiment with the MRI machine that I show on the next slide on animal emotions. Gregory Burns trained dogs to lay still in the MRI machine. And when they smell their favorite person, the reward centers light up. Yep, they've got emotions. And you want to read a funny book. He describes when he first started, he's sneaking dogs into the hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning. But now he's got enough grants that he can, he bought his own scanner, so he doesn't have to do that anymore. But really fascinating research. The next slide answers the question, do animals feel pain? Now, the gold standard is the self-medication experiment. Now, the way that is done is you artificially create a painful joint. And will the animal drink something or eat something that tastes really nasty to reduce the pain? Yes, it will. Yeah. This has been done in rats and it's been done in chickens. Yes, they feel pain. But then a rancher will say to me, well, I castrated my calves and they just ate and drank. Cattle are prey species animal. The sheep are even worse at this. They cover up the fact that they hurt. They cover it up. They don't want to advertise to predators that they hurt. So you want to find out if something hurts. Put some video cameras on and spy on them. Or what I did one time at one feed yard, I hid in the scale house. They were using that big bander thing on 700-pound bulls. They didn't know I was in that scale house, and I could see them when they came out of the squeeze chute. One of them laid down, rolled around, and moaned. But when I went out there, when I came out of the scale house, he covered it up. That's what sheep and cattle do. Now, the next slide just asks a really important question. What do dogs in an animal shelter need? They need people. They need volunteers to come in every day and take every dog out for 45 minutes of funsies and a good time with a person. And the next day, your salivary cortisols will be significantly lower. But you got to do it every day. And this is another study that one of my students, Krista Coppola, did. And we've got a paper in physiology and behavior. Now, my next slide, I want to show you a cool dog park that really worked. This is in Kansas City. It's called Bark. This really, really worked. It was wonderful to see kids out there playing with dogs, not a phone in sight. So basically what you do is you serve drinks there. Now, no outside foods allowed, either doggy food or people food because of resource guarding. And they provide lots of house tennis balls. Don't bring in their toys from home. We provide lots of tennis balls. And they have to enforce these rules. Also, they found they had to kick out 10% of the really aggressive dogs. And the owner of the place told me he had to kick his own rescue out because it was too aggressive. And then the other thing, they got very attentive staff. And if you have some dogs, too many dogs congregating in one place, they kind of say, hey, let's separate. And it was working. I spent 2 hours there. This was just great. Dogs and kids having just a great time while the grown-ups drank daiquiris. They were a little bit watered down, but you don't want a bunch of drunks there. And they'd made the whole thing out of shipping containers. Really, really cool. But I want to emphasize, it's got to be managed. It's got to be managed. People always want the thing more than they want the management. And if this isn't managed, it would turn into a mess. And they had staff there pick up the dog poop just instantly. Okay, the next slide asks the question, do pressure wraps actually work for dogs? Well, where they may work the best is with separation anxiety, not thunder, separation anxiety. And Camille King, another really great researcher, she's an independent researcher. She does all the work. All I do is I help her on the methods and looking at the behavior data. Well, you leave a dog alone in a kennel, the undershirt will reduce the heart rate. It works better on dogs that are not medicated. And the dog will spend less time staring at the door, waiting for Camille to come back. Yeah, it seems to work on that. And then the way that they did for control, this was really good methods, is the controls wore a undershirt that was way too loose. So we separated clothing variable from the pressure variable. The next slide shows my squeezing machine. I had terrible anxiety as a teenager, and I watched cattle going in the cattle squeeze chute. And I've discussed this in detail in my book, Thinking in Pictures. And I noticed sometimes the cattle calm down, so I went and built a squeeze chute myself. And you can look on the next slide, see a rear view picture of me when I wasn't quite as fat as I am now. I'm some skilled trades there. I built that all myself. This brings up another thing. I'm very concerned. Kids are growing up today not using tools. I had a girl in my class who had never used a tape measure or ruler. They're totally removed from the world of the practical things. And they're going to make serious policy decisions about stuff tomorrow when they're totally removed from the practical world. Now, the next slide just says that a brain can be more cognitive or a brain can be more social emotional. Now, there's a point where mild autism is just a personality variant, because there are a lot of famous people in the past, like Michelangelo and Einstein, he didn't talk until age 3, that probably were autistic. They were less social. Now, let's look at this interesting paper about animals. Solitary mammals provide an animal model for autism. You can find the paper by typing those keywords into Google. Now, lions are more social than panthers or leopards. So maybe panthers and leopards are somewhat autistic. There's genetic crossover. Are panthers and leopards defective? No. Now, but the problem with autism is you're going all the way from Einstein to somebody who can't dress themselves. It's called the same thing. That's a verbal thinker. They're overgeneralizing. Now, the next slide, it just has outlined some interesting research on wolves. We have bred dogs to be super social. So they'll ask us to open the door for them, where the wolf will just go up there and try to figure it out himself. We've bred dogs to be hypersocial. Yep, and then we deprive them of their social life, and we wonder why we have behavior problems. Animals reared alone, whether it's puppies, cattle, horses, where they're reared alone without their own kind, they'll viciously fight other animals. They've never learned that give and take of social relations. They will fight other animals. Terrible. Now, this is another fascinating paper on the next slide. The same genes that give us a huge brain, all these stem cells, I got to grow and grow and grow, build this big computer on top, are also involved in autism and schizophrenia. Building a big brain, messy proposition. Genetics can't control every cell where it goes. I mean, they got to grow really fast to make us have a big brain. Let's go to the next slide. The next slide, what I want to show in this is when you force an animal to do something, like you hold a dog down, manhandle it for nail trim, you're going to have a lot more stress than voluntary. So there's beef cattle roughed up, real high cortisol levels. Now, when an animal voluntarily cooperates, stress is lower. The dairy cow walks in. Also, they're genetically less flighty. And I worked with Nancy Earlback a number of years ago on training antelopes to voluntarily cooperate with veterinary procedures. And they're shown on the next slide. And when we trained them, we got almost baseline cortisol levels. And what was in the literature that was considered normal cortisol levels were actually stressed cortisol levels. You know, people didn't like being told they were stressing the you-know-what out of these animals. The other thing we learned is that the veterinarian who had shot them with the dart gun could never work with our trained animals. He was a bad guy. It didn't matter how we dressed him up or we made sure he didn't talk. They knew him. And now zoos are doing this. But when I did this back in the early 90s, people thought it was crazy. So let's just go on to the next slide that basically talks about the importance of stockmanship. Stockmanship on taking care of chickens, pigs, cattle, whatever, doesn't get enough credit. There's a ton of research. I've got papers on this that show that good stockmanship matters. And it matters a whole lot. All right, the next slide just has a cute picture to remind you that an animal's first experience with something new, a new person like a veterinarian, a new thing like a horse trailer, or needs to be a good first experience. A new person, a new truck, a four-wheeler. You want to make sure that first experience with new stuff, the corrals, the brand new corrals, why don't you bring them in and feed them in there? And oftentimes, you know, the question gets asked, should the owner be there during a veterinary procedure? And this next research shows, yes, in most cases, the owner should be there. Horses were less afraid of novel things when they had a familiar person with them. The owner was present at the vet hospital. The dog got less fearful. Now, the only exception of that is maybe some guard dog that feels he's got to protect his owner against the veterinarian. Then in that situation, you want that owner 5 miles down the road. The next slide just brings up the concept that animals make categories. Maybe I'm on the leash, I protect, off the leash, I can play. When I'm inside the semi-trailer cab, you stick your hand in, I'm going to rip your hand off. And when I'm outside the cab, I'm your best buddies. I know a big, black, fluffy dog named Millie, and that's exactly how she acts. And she belongs to a cattle truck driver. Don't stick your hand in the cab. She'll chew it off for you. Outside the cab, she's completely friendly. So that's an animal making categories. The next slide shows how an autistic person makes categories, like maybe sorting cats and dogs like into a spreadsheet in their brain. Now the next slide mentions some interesting things about the brain. Verbal thinkers top down, big concept. My thinking, the more I go out, let's say I was a field representative for your company, and I go out and I visit all these places. I now have all these individual files, different farms. So there's a problem out on the farm. I can say, well, that's sort of like this place over here. So a good field rep, maybe in their 50s, might be your best field rep because they got more farms stored away in their brain. That's bottom-up thinking. The next slide just says, animals do bottom-up thinking. People with autism do it. Computers, artificial intelligence systems for diagnosing things like melanoma also do it. You get that artificial intelligence is only as good as your training set. Well, the mathematicians make the program. Maybe us visual thinkers need to work on the training set. There's been some problems with biases, and it has to do with the training set, not with the programming. Now we got to talk a little bit about livestock handling. I have lots of stuff on livestock handling. I've got a web page, Grandin.com. You can see here the flight zone of the flock of sheep. And that flight zone is going to vary depending on genetics, amount of contact with people, and the quality of that contact. And Grandin.com has got lots of cattle handling stuff. I've got books on cattle handling. I find I have to keep teaching basics. Let's go to the next slide where I just talk about a few little basics with the cattle handling. If when you enter the flight zone, the animal moves away. There's kind of two zones in animals that are not trained show cattle. I walk into the flight zone, they move away. Now you see the tan one, he's looking at me. So there's two zones. There's a zone where they move away, and there's the zone where they know you're there. And then when you're far enough away, those cattle are eating, they don't realize you're there. And the next slide shows a little handy movement pattern for getting animals to go into the squeeze chute. And you walk back by in the opposite direction. Try it. It works. Take that diagram out in the field. Try it. And you got to walk kind of quick. Now, another basic I have to keep talking about is about the number of cattle that people stuff in the crowd pen, coming up to the single file chute, going to squeeze chute, and they jam too many cattle in the crowd pen, they all turn around on you. Good cattle handling requires more walking. Yep, I've got a student now, he's out auditing meatpacking plants. Oh, the other day he told me, oh, they stuffed 30 cattle at a time up this system. They should have brought 15 up. And they were going at them with police whistles. Come on, people. Yeah, let's not do that kind of stuff. The yelling and screaming has to stop. Cattle handling's gotten a whole lot better because it's been a lot of low stress workshops. That's wonderful. But you still have to get on the baby basics, like the groups you bring up and all the noise. Let's go to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about how I got my business started, because I was really weird. So how did I get my business started? I had to sell my work, not myself. So I had a really nice portfolio. And the next slide shows the picture that I used, the drawing I used to sell Cargill on having me design their systems. Yes, I learned to sell my work. And the reason for it coming on around is as they come on around, they want to go back to where they come from. And the next slide shows just one of the pictures I sent to Cargill. I showed off my work. Now, your person that might turn out to be your best field rep, who's autistic, that person's going to interview really bad. No, maybe get them out in the field. The next slide just reminds you about the importance of non-slip flooring. All right, now, I want to give you a visual thinking test. How many of you saw that steer looking at the sunbeam? Oh, I show this to school administrators. No hands go up. And then you see it. See how obvious that is? Show this to elementary school kids. Half the hands go up. The next few slides, I want to talk about animal welfare. And one of the things is you manage things you measure. So I'm a big fan of measuring animal welfare. Falling down score, prod score, vocalization score. These are the beef quality assurance animal welfare measures. Then you can tell, am I getting better or am I getting worse? And the next slide shows data that Ruth Woolly, one of my students, collected at a lot of big feed yards. This is actually really good scores. An average 5% prod score, that's really good. It used to be 500%. Handling's gotten better. There's been studies that shows it got better. But you still have 20 or 30% of the people yelling and screaming and moving too many cattle up at the same time. The thing I have found is people want the thing more than they want the management. Fancy new corral, but then they don't use it correctly. This is something that makes me pull my hair out. And the next slide just shows original data from the original McDonald's audits that I worked on 20 years ago. And when you have a big customer inspecting stuff, boy, it can make a difference. In 1996, only 30% of the plants could stun 95% of the cattle on the first shot because the stun gun was broken. That's management. Then we started measuring it. Things really changed. And the next slide is some of my early temperament data. And we found out, this was done 25 years ago, and we found out that cattle who went crazy in the squeeze chute had lower weight gains. And when I did that 25 years ago, people thought I was nuts. Well, turned out it worked. Calm cattle, calmly handled cattle, cattle that are calm genetically, they have more weight gain. But the thing I want to warn you on is don't over-select for temperament. That's in the next slide. You know, for the last 20 years, we have been selecting cattle for a calm temperament. And I'm worried that if we overdo it, you might get some dullhead that won't take care of our calf. Traits are linked. And they're linked in ways that still are not fully understood. And I'm going to be showing you some really interesting stuff on that. Now, let's say you overselect for any one thing, you're going to get into trouble. Now, the Brahmins, if you treat them right, they love stroking. Teach people to don't pat a dog like this or a horse like this. Stroke it. Teach people to stroke it. Stroke it. Make it feel like the mother's tongue. Now, the next slide just shows critical control points for animal welfare. Well, and I've got some new papers. You might want to go onto Google Scholar and just type in Temple Grandin and then set it for 2022. I've got a paper on animal welfare. I've got another paper on grazing and how that can be used to improve the environment. But you can't measure everything. And I do a lot of work with supply chain managers, commercial supply chain managers. And so I want to do handling measurement. Okay, let's say in a dairy, One of the things I want to measure is how many swollen hock joints do I have? And I can measure that. One of the big things in dairy is lameness. And it got really high because when a dairy person is asked to estimate how many lame cows they have, they'll underestimate by half. You got to measure it. We got to measure lameness. Dirty, filthy animals. Body condition. There's very nice body condition scores. Ammonia levels in indoor buildings. Heat stress. Cattle at rest should breathe with the mouth shut, period. And I can think of a great use for solar panels. Feedlot shade that will pay for itself. You want to mount them 12 foot high, and then you want to put them north and south so the shadow will move. Because even in Arizona, if the shadow doesn't move, you'll have a big mud pie under there. Yeah, really good use for solar panels. And even if they get dirty, they'll probably still pay for themselves. And then you organic people, you better be looking at coat condition. You know, a bunch of lice on organic cattle is not okay. That's an example of bad becoming normal. Now, the next slide just shows all the stuff that makes cattle lame. Okay, you see lameness scoring is a critical control point. All these other things on this slide that you can look at later are things the veterinarians and the managers have to figure out. So I don't measure this stuff. I measure lameness because all these things I have on this slide will make cattle lame. The next thing I got to be concerned about is conformation. We breed too much for meat, both in pigs and cattle. We're going to get leg conformation issues. I like to look at an animal breeding like a national budget. If I put everything into the economy, meat, milk, or eggs, I shortchange things like leg conformation. There's more cardiac problems in cattle now. There's repro problems in dairy cattle. So that's your infrastructure. So I've got the economy, I got the infrastructure, and then I got the military. That's my immune function. Everything takes energy to operate. Yeah, you don't want to breed all the military out of them. The next slide shows a really hideous, ugly show steer with a really straight leg. I don't know, show cattle, they're just really weird. He wouldn't breed very many cows if he was a bull. The next slide shows a hideous foot on a pig. Now, this is a mistake the pig industry made years ago. And then I saw a foot like that on cattle, repeating the same mistakes. Beautiful non-slip floor that pig is on. Beautiful non-slip floor, hideous foot. And that's genetic. Yeah, there's been concerns about beta agonists, but a lot of this problem with pigs started before beta agonists ever showed up. The next slide just shows crooked claw, which is another genetic thing. Yes, we need to still look at animals. There is a place for visual appraisal, not just looking at spreadsheets and EPDs. Now I'm going to show you some mind-blowing slides that are really old. I'm going to show you a gray fox. These are the Belyaev experiments. They were done years ago. Now, they wanted to have a fur fox that wouldn't tear your head off, tear your hand off. Now, you see how lanky he is? So for 20 generations, all they did was select for a fur fox that wouldn't tear your hand off. I'll show you what they got. They got a stocky black and white fox. He's on the next slide. You change the body shape. All you did is select for temperament. Traits are linked, and they're linked in ways that isn't fully explained. Then they overdid this. They got this gentle border collie fox dog. They overdid it, and they got epilepsy. That was a mess. The next slide shows some tame deer. And 30 years ago, with farm deer, you couldn't get in a pen like this. But you know what? I shouldn't have cropped that slide because they have nasty legs that splay out like that. They got really crappy legs. Now I have to finish up and trash the bulldog. Well, that's what a bulldog used to look like. Now, got to show you what a bulldog looks like now. All right, how did we get to this bad becoming normal? The breed standard said massive head. That's the exact wording. So how did you get to this mess? Can't breathe, can't walk, can't have its babies naturally? Why are you breeding that? The next slide shows you what a bulldog should look like. That's a picture from 1938. You can find it online by typing in Bulldog's Dilemma. Now I'm going to show you a nice pug that actually can breathe. The little tan one can breathe, and that other little black one, he has breathing problems. Let's start breeding decent pugs. I didn't say get rid of pugs. Breed decent pugs. That's what we need to do. Now I'm going to show you a hideous horse. Yes, a dish face is nice, but let's not overdo it. And let's just say a few things about animal welfare. I'm just about done with the slides. Leave some time for questions. Looking at animal welfare research now, we have to prevent suffering, like lameness in dairy cows, hock swellings. But does the animal have positive emotions? Does it have positive experiences? Well, you want to see a dairy cow have a positive experience. Just watch a dairy cow using the motorized rotating brush. They love them. I'm not supposed to say that. The next slide just shows some broiler chickens that actually have got really nice legs. Then they're jumping up on a little scale, even though they're market ready right now. And they bred some legs on these birds. Now, the thing about these high performance birds is that there's no margin of error. You get bad breeder eggs, you're going to have downers and problems. Even if everything else is fine, hatch rate, feed, everything else is fine. So the next slide, I'm going to just show off a few books. We can just say there's Animals in Translation. And now the picture on Animals in Translation, notice how that dog is relaxed. And the other one is just kind of the mouth is shut, not high fear, but anxious. And I'll just put my last slide up there, and then we're going to have a few minutes for questions. And I always like to do questions.
Before we get started answering questions, we'd like to share a brief video, and then we'll be right back to answer the questions that have been submitted during today's presentation. With today's low milk prices and rising feed protein costs, now is the time to turn up the dial on rumen efficiency. NitroSure precision-release nitrogen is designed to help stabilize rumen ammonia pools by synchronizing carbohydrate and nitrogen availability to the microflora. Providing a consistent supply of ammonia is proven to increase rumen microbial populations, improve fiber and dry matter digestibility, and stimulate microbial protein yield, all leading to greater efficiencies in forage utilization and higher milk and milk component production. Maximize rumen microflora with NitroSure to turn up rumen efficiency and productivity. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the Q&A tab at the top of your screen. So, Dr. Grandin, your first question is from Amaya, and she is asking, what would you suggest to do for a dog's emotional well-being when they have to be left at home due to an owner's schedule?
Well, you might put them in a doggy daycare, or maybe you share the dog with somebody who lives next door that doesn't work. Because I think some of these dogs are having a really hard time. The other thing is some dogs tolerate home alone better than others. Teresa, a really nice lady that's worked with me on some of my trips, she had a dog that used to tolerate home alone just fine. And then they went on a 10-day camping trip where the dog was there 24/7 with them in a camper. She left it at home and it ate a door. And this is a dog that previously had been okay on home alone. So one thing you can do is gradually increase the time that it's home alone, and then reward it for not whining or scratching. You have to gradually change it. Gradual changes and you can get some dogs to tolerate being home alone, but there's some that really have a problem. And there's genetic differences in how well they tolerate stuff like being home alone. Very good.
Next question comes from Tom. In dairy production, we're no longer docking tails and we're using pain relievers for dehorning and castrating. What do you see as the next consumer-driven change that the animal industry will need to implement?
Well, let's discuss dairy. And I'm going to just discuss things where people have called me and emails I've gotten. Taking calves away from the mama cow. That is something I'm getting emails on. And it's probably something that's going to have to be addressed. And it might be easier to address it in some of these robotic milking systems. When I went to Mexico, out in the Yucatan, they'd milk 3/4 for the farm, and 1/4 was left for the baby calf, and it learned to stay outside the milking parlor. This is something that's going to have to be looked at in the future, and this is just based on emails. When I get emails about dairy, that's what it's about. And the only answer I can give them right now is that this is not a factory farming thing. It's something that when I was a teenager and my school had a 12-cow dairy, we took the calves away. Okay, now I'm thinking of some positive emotions. These cattle stayed in the stanchion barn all winter, and when they were let out in the spring, you should have seen happy cows. Oh man, jumping all around for joy because they were out.
Excellent. Here's an interesting question. In your perspective, Dr. Grandin, this is from Manuel, what has the impact been of the COVID lockdown, and has it had permanent impact on society?
Well, a lot of kids have had problems. I've seen some of the graduate students that took the wind out of some of their sails. What I had to do to get over COVID is do what they do in the space station. Get up every morning, have a schedule, and this was the big COVID project. I had to have something to do. And then I also we had a quarantine group. But having a schedule helped. But I think some kids, it's set them back. It's been bad. It's not been a good thing at all. Boy, I can tell you, I was grounded for a whole year. And then as soon as I was vaccinated, all my events were canceled. Everything went online. I remember the horrible faculty meeting where we had to get all the stuff online. And that was just awful. And as soon as I was vaccinated, I started going out to events. I said, COVID's done. And I've got to get my 5th booster. I just did my flu shot, and I don't like to put them right on top of each other. So I got to go and get my 5th COVID shot because I went to Portugal and they required an extra COVID shot. I couldn't go.
Interesting.
No, no. A lot of people are still afraid of it. I'm done with it. It's done.
Yeah.
I will get it. And other people that are fully vaccinated, they're getting it, and they're getting over it.
Yeah. Next question kind of goes back to animals. It's from Chad. And he asks, are animals self-aware? Example, does a dog know it's a dog? Is this something we can even know?
Well, one of the ways to test that is to see the mirror test. What does it do in a mirror? Now, dolphins, elephants, and chimps very quickly figure out that that image is them. In fact, elephants and dolphins will get into very strange body contortions to look at the backside of their body. Dogs tend to treat it as just another animal, or they'll go behind the mirror looking for the other animal. And well, animals are self-aware in that they know their body space. For example, if you have horned cattle, if you're gentle with them, they'll learn to turn that rack so they can walk through a chute. So they're aware of their body. And this gets into the whole issue of animal consciousness. And I think some of this discussion goes back to verbal thinking versus sensory-based thinking. It might be difficult for somebody that's fully verbal, very verbal in their thinking, very high verbal thinker, to imagine that a dog can think. But since I can think without words, it's obvious to me that a dog can think. And actually, the last chapter of visual thinking goes into this. No, we've got to have good animal welfare. I eat meat, but we've got to do it right. In fact, I wrote this paper on grazing right here. Grazing animals are an important part of a sustainable agricultural system. And I reviewed all the literature on grazing. We need to be grazing livestock cover crops mixed in with corn and soy. And what people forget when they say that cattle take up all this land, 20% of the world's land is grazing land. You cannot crop that land. If you want to raise food on it, you're going to have to graze sheep, cattle, goats, bison, something that grazes.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to do it right, because you can wreck land with grazing. You do it right, you can improve land. That's why I did that paper. I'm 75 years old, spent my life in the livestock industry, and I think on the great cattle getting unfairly bashed. Mm-hmm. Let's look at methane, leaking oil wells. I just learned this morning in The Economist that those giant ships that are hauling methane have enough methane for a month to supply everybody in Europe in the wintertime. What if one of those broke? Mm-hmm. Yeah, all right. Yeah, leave it with that thought. That was my breakfast reading this morning from The Economist. I learned that.
Excellent. Next question is from James. In a robot dairy, what is the primary motivations for animals to be milked? Udder pressure relief, or feed reward, or both? Well, what might be some design problems that may impact movement?
Well, I think we need to have dummy robots where you can train heifers before they freshen just to go into it to eat. And so they're not afraid of it. And food is a big motivation. And you want to make sure that when the heifer first goes in that robot, nothing bad happens, like falling on her butt, for example. You got to make sure that doesn't happen. But let's start training the heifers before they freshen, just to go in. You can use a dummy stall that just has a feeder in it. And so they learn that that's a good place. And there's a lot of different layouts and stuff you can do. Don't overstock them. Please don't. Equipment companies overestimate the number of animals you can put on a robotic milker, that you can put on a water or a feeder. Or if it's sows, electronic sow feeders, they'll tell you too many sows. Equipment companies overestimate the capacity of the equipment. You need to really, really watch for that. They'll tell you more animals than a piece of equipment can actually manage properly.
Interesting.
Yeah, you need to watch that. Like, cut it back maybe 25%. They say that this will work. If some piece of equipment works for 60 cattle, maybe try 45. Probably going to work better.
Interesting. Next question comes from Colin. Said, first off, thank you for the great talk, he says. And then just wondering if you think it would be worth breeding fear in dairy calves, given the advantages you've mentioned during your talk. As far as I'm aware, there's only selection on milking temperament and nothing regarding calves. If so, how would you suggest collecting the phenotype on this?
Well, I don't want to make animals more fearful, if I understood that question correctly. You actually want animals that
yeah, I think he meant worth breeding for less fear.
Well, dairy cows already a pretty low fear. And I didn't realize how much we had changed Angus cattle in 20 years until about 5 years ago. Our experiment station bred the time machine. They tried out some new bull semen. And the time machine showed up in my lab for my class. And this steer was nuts compared to our other cattle, trying to break out of the cattle handling facility, kicking, going completely berserk. And all of the previous experience had been the same. The time machine was completely crazy. That's why I call him the time machine, because it was like a throwback to the times before we did temperament selection. And I'm going, whoa, oh, wonder I had to build all the facilities with high solid size, handle those kind of cattle. I didn't realize myself how much they'd changed. It's sort of like the lameness problem in dairy cattle. Things slowly change and you don't see it until the lameness got really bad. But it was just unbelievable how crazy this steer was compared to all the other Angus steers we had. And they will never use that semen again.
Well, we are coming up to the top of the hour and we have quite a few questions, but I will leave you with one.
I can go on a little bit longer. I told the other people that I might be 5 minutes late. So maybe we can try just a couple of more questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, this one comes from Stan. What do you think of the bud box design for cattle handling?
Okay, I'm glad that came up. And now in my I have 2 books on livestock handling. I've got Humane Livestock Handling, and then I've got Temple Grandin's Guide for Working with Farm Animals. Now, there's kind of 2 ways I can go about design. I can make something like the bud box, very simple, very economical, but it takes more skill to operate it. Or I can use one of my curved systems. They're on my website, that are in a lot of my books, but they're more expensive, but easier to operate. Bud boxes take a lot more skill. Where they make the most sense is where people have to haul portable panels around, especially on leased land. And they have their cattle that are gentle and they know how to use the bud box. I would not put a bud box in a truck loading area where every different kind of trucker is coming in there and using it. That's where I would not use it. It's basically simple to build, skill dependent. Where some of my kind of layouts, curved layouts, are more expensive to build, but less skilled people can operate them. And both systems, you want to fill the crowd pen half full, but a bud box, what you put in the box, must all fit in the lead-up chute. So if storing cattle in a bud box is a total mess. You got to bring them in there, then they circle around you and go into the chute. So There's a place for both systems. Big feed yards, I'm probably going to go with with one of my systems simply because I have employee turnover. And it does take longer to train an employee to use a bud box correctly. And you get into a safety issue if it's not used correctly.
Nice. Okay. Next question is from Amy. Wondering what you think about the 2 schools of dog training. Positive training only versus using correction when needed. In my opinion, it's unfair to let a dog know when it's wrong, but purely positive people disagree. What do you think?
Well, if you want to teach a dog new tasks, I want to do positive absolutely as much as I can. And I want to get rid of harsh things. I'm going to give you an example. About 5 years ago, I went to an airport. We won't say where I was. But the town policeman was in the airport security. And his German Shepherd looked at a dog that was in a carrier going to the x-ray machine. This policeman hung that dog right there in the security area. Well, I kept my mouth shut. I don't mess around at the airport. But let me tell you, I'm telling you about it now. It was TSA did not do it. It was a local policeman. That's not okay. I mean, that's kind of stuff real heavy use of pinch collars. One of the things where I think positive would be really difficult to make it work is prey drive. You've got a sheep killer out there. Unless you lock the dog up and tie it up all the time, it's going to be hard to do that totally positive. But a lot of other things like teaching to sit, there's a lot of stuff that you can just do totally positive. You see, the thing where people get in trouble is getting too extreme on stuff. It's either one way totally or the other way. But hanging a dog, because he just picked it up like this, hung it by a choke collar, because it looked at a little dog that was in a crate. Looked at it. That's all it did. Just turned its head. So he choked it. That's an example of absolutely not okay.
Right.
And did it right there. Like 20, it wasn't it was a medium-sized airport. There's maybe 25 people in security saw that.
Wow.
No, I thought it was just terrible. And I kept my mouth shut at the airport, but I'm telling you now.
Yeah, that's not appropriate.
No, it was not. And it's the other thing is I think a lot of dogs don't get enough exercise. They don't get enough socialization with other dogs. And a lot of these behavior problems, we didn't have them in the 50s. When I was a child, all the dogs ran loose. We brought them in at night, and we had very few behavior problems. We had a lot of dogs killed by cars, but they actually had a better life. They had a social life.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do one more quick one, and then I've really got to go.
One more quick question then. YB says, I've noticed that dogs do not seem to respond to people that are on a video call. What is your experience and any thoughts why that could be?
I don't know. That's something I haven't really looked into. Okay. The other thing is it might be flicker on the monitor.
Oh.
Dogs can see flicker of LED lighting, and if it might be a function of the monitor, that's something will need to be researched. Now, dogs will watch TV and bark and stuff and run behind a TV trying to find a dog. And so, but seeing flicker might be causing some of the problem. And some screens flicker. You got a power supply going out on a cheap monitor. Yeah, they'd be seeing the flicker. The power supply slowly breaks. I had that happen with the monitor. Oh, I said, I didn't have time to go find a new power supply for it, and they put a cheap one in it.
Yeah, that'll get you every time, won't it?
Well, but this is the kind of stuff where my mind's associative. You see that? I'm seeing the monitor to end up in the garbage because, well, if it had been there during lockdown, I would have bought the new power supply. I actually knew how to take it apart and fix it. I just too busy to do that. But you can see right there how my mind was associative. And I really do have to go.
Yep.
Because I've got some people in the UK waiting for me right now.
Well, I will wrap up here really quick. Thank you, Dr. Grandin, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. If you have additional questions, please submit them to anh.marketing@balchem.com. The Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues on December 13th as we welcome back Dr. Brett Stewart with Global Agri-Trends to share his insight into what 2023 will bring for the global economy. Visit balchem.com/realscience for more details and to register. Balchem's podcast series continues to offer a deeper dive into our webinar topics. Log on to your favorite podcast platform or visit balchem.com/podcast. Subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address, and we'll send you a cool Real Science Exchange t-shirt. On behalf of Balchem and Dr. Grandin, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And I'm going to have to sign off and get with the people in the UK. And thank you for watching. And I hope I gave you some ideas you can take home and use. And I'm going to have to click off right now.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.